We stand now where two roads diverge, but unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, they are not equally fair. The road we have long been traveling is deceptively easy and a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed. But at its end lies disaster. The other fork of the road, the one less traveled by, offers our last and our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of the earth. At this time, I would like to introduce Victor Marshall, who gave us a presentation last year that was absolutely jaw-dropping, and he is here to repeat it and give us an update on our climate.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you also, Mary, for reading that great poem. I loved it. It's very well done.
Thank you.
Wish I had that skill. I'm more of a science guy, more data. Anyway, we're pretty good at handling emergency issues. You know, the human race as a whole is. If the church caught on fire, everybody would be jumping at it and doing some things to take care of it. But if there were termites in the foundation, it might take a long time before we begin to go, before we begin to do something about it. George, can you hear me okay? Okay. Okay. As long as I what?
Standing on the side of the room.
Okay, is this good right here? Use the mic, okay. Is that better? Can you hear that better? Thank you. Anyway, what we have is an issue that's been building very slowly for a long period of time. And the good thing is that it's finally beginning to get a lot of people's attention. The bad thing is it's bad. So what I wanted to do was to share some things with you today and see how we can move ahead to begin to do something about this issue. This is an update, and you'll see some of the same slides that you saw last year. I think it was June that I gave this talk last year, so 13 months ago or so. I got some questions following that, and I think I needed to explain some of them a little bit more. So I've got some of those slides that I'll show a little bit more, but golly, there's a lot of new stuff that's happened since last year also. This developed out of our covenants. The seventh covenant that we have with each other is a respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. This whole thing came from that. I think Cindy started this several times ago. You saw this slide last year. It's about the nature of science, and I think I didn't explain this very well. I think I went through it fairly quickly. Basically, science is a process where you continuously measure things and evaluate and reevaluate, and you also get other people who are experts in the field to continuously reevaluate also. And as more people collect more data, get better understanding, we tend to modify our thoughts about something. Well, this thought on global warming began a long time ago, and I'll kind of share that with you as we go along. It's been a slow burn issue that is now burning fast. The scientists who've been studying this have been predicting and verifying that burning fossil fuels causes global warming. There's still a lot of people, apparently I missed some of you as well, who don't feel this way. But what I want to do is to assure you that there's no other hypothesis. To a scientist, a hypothesis is kind of where they start. Once they have tons of data, tons of evidence, and everybody agrees on it, then they call it a theory. We're engaged in a political debate about political theory and science theory. And it's on the news quite frequently. Politicians who don't accept the science data of global warming control the presidency, the House, and the Senate. So it's pretty much been ignored. All of the vast amount of governmental data is slowly being scrubbed. Information is coming off of websites. I sure hope it's going on some server somewhere where it's going to be preserved, because there's a lot of good evidence that we need to keep. Politically, we've got this, what did I do here? This debate going on. A key office that I've always looked at is the science advisor in the White House. Now, presidents, I don't know if Thomas Jefferson and George, well, actually, Thomas Jefferson was kind of a science guy, but I don't know if George Washington had one or not, but almost all presidents have had science advisors. Who do we have now? No one. Now, there is a function of a science advisor, but it's being accomplished by, oops, too many. I don't know what's going on. One more back. There he is. Michael Kratsios. I think that's Greek. He's the deputy assistant in the Office of Science and Technology, and he's the one that all the science stuff comes to evaluate and pass it on to the president. He's 31 years old. He has a BA in political science on Hellenic studies. Y'all know what Hellenic studies is? Some of you got to. Greek. That's what he specializes in, studying Greece. So what's he doing? Acting as a de facto science advisor. This guy, former EPA guy, he said there's tremendous disagreement about the impact of CO2. Here's the disagreement. Out of 2,258 science journals written by 9,136 scientists, specialists who study this, there's one. I don't know if you can see that little skinny black wedge at the top. One guy disagreed. It says, I'm not sure there's enough proof that global warming is caused by carbon dioxide accumulation. This guy, Monday, tomorrow, he's going to be the new EPA guy. He was the chief lobbyist for Murray Coal. He's rejected global warming. He's lobbied for that forever. He was the one who got our president to reduce Bears Ears National Monument to a smaller size. Anybody know why? They're going to strip mine for coal and uranium. This guy, another agency that's done a lot of work on global warming is NASA. Boy, they've collected all kinds of things with all their flights and so on. He's an economic major who says there's no consensus on global warming. His skill set is that he was a Navy pilot, so that's why he's in charge of NASA. Socially and politically, the way the layperson uses it, as theory, something that we think will happen or wish will happen, hope will happen. There's no data supported. And that's key, data. We just think it's going to happen, or we hope it'll happen. Political theory holds that global warming is caused by the cycles of the sun. No data for that. The sun is actually in a cooling cycle while the earth is warming. There's no agreement among scientists. You always saw that graph. I mean, since 2000, there have been just very few articles that have been written in peer-reviewed science journals. This is where specialists submit their things. It's got to be peer-reviewed. Temperature is actually cooling. Oh my goodness. Is that what you're seeing? We've had 17 to 18 hottest years on record since 2000. The models are not accurate. Well, the models have been predicting what's been happening for years and years, over a century now. Political theory holds that it's too expensive to do anything about it. What's going to be the cost of Miami, Hong Kong, New York, The Hague, New Orleans, Shanghai, Naples, Rio de Janeiro, Alexandria? The list goes on, being underwater. Scientists use the word theory to describe a concept that there's really strong consensus for. If there's a problem with it, they don't call it a theory. Everybody has to pretty much be on board. Now, you're never going to get 100%. There's always some crazy people out there, but you get most people. Theory of aerodynamics that explains our planes flying. Theory of electricity that gives us these lights. Theory of planetary motion that tells us when the sun's coming up tomorrow. theory of evolution that tells us our relationship to other living things, theory of global warming that explains what's happening with our planet. Some people have said it's a Chinese plot. The Chinese are doing 10 times more than we are. Their government is really invested because they understand what's going to happen to their big cities that are next to the sea. They've already built some massive cities in land that nobody's living in because they know they're going to need places for those people to live. Cost American jobs, there's more jobs created in renewable energy than currently exist in the coal industry, the petroleum industry, the natural gas industry, the uranium industry. Scientists don't agree on, you already saw that graph. Email bullying, there was a big thing that people made about people being emailed and bullied into agreeing. That was all fake news. Falsified data, that's fake news. Not a serious issue. Whoa. Here's where I think I need to explain a little bit more from some questions that people have. The sun's rays come through the Earth's atmosphere. They strike the Earth and they're reflected back. A lot of them go back out into space. That gives us those beautiful pictures of the Earth from outer space. Our atmosphere, though, will trap some of that energy and hold it in, and that's what makes our Earth habitable. That's what enables us to live here. That's what enabled life to evolve on Earth, is the atmosphere. Now, I think I mentioned the last time, just before I gave this talk, I saw Ted Cruz on TV, and he said, well, it's actually getting colder in outer space. And that's true, because the Earth's temperature is being trapped on the Earth. So some of the satellites that were above those big yellow arrows on the side, some of the satellites measuring temperature out there, yes, it was colder out there. We don't live out there, though. We live here, and that's where we need to be concerned about. There's our temperatures. I was coming back from Detroit this winter from Detroit, and somebody was on, I was just kind of scanning, I was driving, so I was hitting the scan button to look at channels, and somebody was on there, and he was being asked, what about this global warming thing? Isn't the Earth getting hotter? And he says, nope, it's actually getting colder in several locations. The cooler areas are blue, the hotter areas are in red. So the cooler areas, South Pole, out in the oceans a couple places, but look at all the landforms. This dark red up in the north, that's over 4 degrees centigrade. That's like 7, 8 degrees Fahrenheit. That much warmer in the Arctic at this time. But look at the landforms. They're all much warmer. This is a graph, and I showed you this one the last time. Carbon dioxide accumulations are the red line and the yellow line. Temperature variations are the blue line. Something that's kind of interesting, if you notice the blue line, see how it takes a big spike around the mid-30s to the mid-40s. Anybody remember what was going on then? Mid-30s, mid-40s? World War II. We're burning all kinds of fuel. We're dropping all kinds of explosives. There's another spike, Korea, another spike, Vietnam, another spike, the Iraq War, when Saddam had torched off all those oil wells and set them burning. This is a graph that stretches the changes out over a little bit longer time so that you can see what's meant by an exponential curve. And I'll explain this a little bit more, but exponential curves are ones that go up like that. For a long time, we've been pretty stable. But now we're at a curve that's starting to sweep upward steeply. Last time I gave you this as an illustration. I talked about mowing Jane Volk's yard for $1 first week and then double that the second week. Look at how much she'd be paying me the 22nd week to mow her yard. $2,097,152. So that's the numbers of exponential growth. Now that's what you want your investments to do, but that's not what you want changes in our environment to do. This is the guy that introduced me to this in the spring of 1964. Talked about CO2 accumulations causing the Earth to get warmer, melting the polar ice caps, increasing extreme weather events, crop failures and famine, species extinction. I found another guy who actually started it. I wasn't aware of this, so I was reading. Actually, I saw a show on Nova, and they were talking about it. This guy, I'm not good at French, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. This guy is the first guy who talked about the atmosphere keeping the Earth's temperature constant. He was Napoleon Bonaparte's science advisor. He obviously didn't know much about Russia, but anyway, he did know about the atmosphere. Notice the date, 1807. This is not new stuff. You've seen him before, 1860, he performed a number of experiments. This guy did some calculations in 1896. He was a Swede. He was the president of the Nobel Prize Institute. Alexander Graham Bell is credited with first publishing the name greenhouse effect. Look what he said in the bottom line. He suggested we should all use solar energy. 1917. Here's two guys sitting there having an interesting chat. I put my money on the sun and solar. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. That's attributed to Thomas Edison talking to Henry Ford. Glaciers and polar ice are melting, and it's accelerating. Storms are more erratic and more extreme. Extreme rain, drought, and winds. Massive famines around the world. Syria is in the 13th year of its climate-induced crop failures. Permafrost is melting, releasing more methane. Wildfires are consuming our forests. We're in the early stages of the sixth major extinction of different life forms on Earth. Increasing carbon dioxide is making the ocean more acidic, which destroys the corals, and it also breaks down the food chains that so many people depend upon for a livelihood. Jet stream has shifted. Woo, this is a scary one. This is kind of what prompted this talk. Remember the polar vortex last winter? Actually, the 2 winters before also. The polar vortex has been created by the shifting jet stream, and it's been producing heavy winter snows at times when we're not really used to heavy winter snows. That's when one of you asked me, is this really the global effect, global warming? Flow of the Gulf Stream is slowing down. It's also shifting. We have no idea what that means. Sea levels rising, Arctic temperatures have soared for the 4th year in a row. Last week, we set a world record for the most all-time heat records broken. This weekend, today, the American Southwest is under an excessive heat watch for 28 million people. They're expecting temperatures to reach 120 degrees. Fires are consuming thousands of acres, and this is just in California. Fires are all across the West. I had a graph, but it was so many fires that you couldn't tell anything. It looked like the West was burning. Migrants continue to leave the Middle East and Africa, destabilizing European governments. They don't have anything to eat. Last Thursday, 2 days ago, is that right? 2 days ago? July 5th, the hottest temperature ever recorded on Earth was recorded in Algeria, 124.3 degrees. It was over a degree hotter than the previous record. On that same date, northern Siberia was 90 degrees, which is 40 degrees above their normal. Hundreds of heat records were broken. Here's a map of that. The green areas, the blue areas are coolest, then green, and then yellow, and then red, and then bright red. The white areas are the hottest. Now we expect Saudi Arabia, Syria, Yemen, Kuwait, we expect those areas to be hot. Look at Algeria, that white dot right in the middle, that's where the high temperature was. American Southwest, we also had it in Death Valley, up through Texas and Kansas and Oklahoma as well. Hot, hot, hot. Our neighbor, to our house, right beside us, lives in Gene Volk's old house. See that white area there by the Caspian Sea? He says it's been averaging 112 to 115 degrees every day. Every day. That's cooking. We're still subsidizing the industries that are causing this. 20 billion. That doesn't cost all the Gulf War I, Gulf War II, all those things that we're doing in the Middle East right now to maintain petroleum supplies. Here's the glaciers, and I picked these slides because they illustrate a couple of other things. You see how some of these are dark on top? That's the soot and the pollen grains and the dust that has accumulated over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Dark things absorb heat more than white things. So those dark areas are causing the glacier to melt even faster. There's some scientists who are trying to develop things where they make reflective mylar sheets, real thin plastic that has a silver coating on top that they can cover the glaciers with. Can you imagine what a project that would be? Whew, to slow these down. The old polar bear. Floods. You may recognize some of these pictures. I didn't have them last year. This was a month after I gave my talk last year. Climate scientists believe that global warming is creating conditions that cause storms to move more slowly, become more powerful, and be more frequent. Houston has had 3 500-year floods in the last 3 years. Now, it doesn't mean it takes every 500 years to get one. It's a chance of 1 out of 500 that they'll have one of those a year. Any mathematicians in here? I think you multiply 1 over 500 3 times, and the probability of this happening is 1 over 125 million to 1. More pictures of Houston. A little bit closer to home. George, you recognize this maybe. Houghton, Father's Day, Houghton, Michigan. 4 to 7 inches of rain in 7 hours. Now, Houghton is built in a valley. There's those steep hills on either side. Excuse me. I've got a cold. My voice is probably going to squeak a few times here today. But anyway, so this is what was on the TV in Houghton on Father's Day. Stay at home. Here's some of the damage. This is not other countries. This is Michigan. It's going to take a while to fix that. These are cities where there's floods coming in. Now, these are called moon tide floods. When there's a high tide and the moon is full, the fuller the moon is, the closer it is to the earth. The orange things, the orange bars, you can't hardly see because they're so small. That was the number of moon tide floods in those areas before 1950. Since 2010 are the purple bars. 1950 to 2010, 60 years. Look how much it's changed. This is going to tell you which cities you don't want to buy real estate in. Boston, Providence, Montauk, New London, Connecticut, Sandy Hook, Battery, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Washington, D.C., Annapolis, Maryland, Wilmington, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Fernandina Beach, Florida, Key West, Florida, St. Petersburg, Galveston, La Jolla, California, San Francisco. You're from San Francisco, aren't you? Seattle. They're getting floods. Not tomorrow. No. This is what it looks like. This is a high tide flood. The top 2 pictures, I think, are South Carolina or Georgia. I can't remember which. The bottom 2 are Miami, Florida. High tide floodings. Not rain. The high tides are coming in. This is Norfolk, Virginia. Same thing. Yesterday, Japan had unprecedented floods. The darker areas, the purple areas, show where the rain was the heaviest. Look at the town there. They had to evacuate 4.72 million people yesterday in Japan. Many years ago, I read a journal article that said if carbon dioxide concentration reaches 400 parts per million, we're going to have a sea level rise of 3 meters. Well, we haven't had a sea level rise of 3 meters, and I think it's because things have gone too fast. When I was in college, they said it would be around 2100 before we'd have to do something. Well, we blew right through that 2 years ago. We're now over 400 parts per million. Well, the red areas are areas that are going to be underwater. Again, you don't want to be buying real estate there. Southern Florida, the Everglades, Naples are going to be gone. All along the coastline. This is if all the ice melts. Can you see the coastline, the real faint blue line out along the right there? I made it as big as I could. But anyway, that's if all the ice melts. Again, look at Florida, Georgia, the Mississippi Valley, California, the whole East Coast. Boston, Halifax, New York, Norfolk, they're gone, underwater. You can visit them with a snorkel. Now this guy, I mentioned him last year, but I didn't have a picture of him. His name is Jason Fox. He's a PhD climatologist. He was working at Ohio State. And Ohio State wasn't really all that interested in his work on climatology, so he went to Denmark. They're a little bit more concerned in Europe because of the lay of their land. when he was describing something, he dropped the F-bomb. I'll come back to that in a minute. So he was criticized roundly, not for what he found, not for his intellect, but because he dropped the F-bomb. He was studying Arctic plumes of methane, studying warming seas that release methane that make the seas warmer, which release more methane until the planet is too warm to support human life. That's what he's studying. Look at those last few words again. Until methane release makes the planet too warm to support human life. That's pretty critical stuff. After studying methane plumes in the Arctic Ocean in 2014, he tweeted, those darn Tweeter and Twitter and all those other accounts, if even a small fraction of the Arctic seafloor carbon is released to the atmosphere, we're F-bombed. This is just a graphic showing upper left-hand corner, the permafrost, the white is ice. Permafrost, it's been there for thousands and thousands of years. Underneath the permafrost are methyl hydrides that when they melt, they release methane gas. Well, it shows them being released in the ocean, it shows them being released over the land. The orange areas in the top right are where there's the most permafrost and the most methyl hydrides. This graphic in the middle shows the land shrinking as the white things, the ice flows melt. It shows the land shrinking down and releasing methane. There's an area where it's shrinking. It's literally falling away as it melts. There's a sinkhole that develops from it. The thing that got me going last spring, have anyone ever heard of the Svalbard? It's Norwegian. Is that how you pronounce Norwegian words? Svalbard? Well, anyway. More commonly, it's known as the Doomsday Seed Vault. The Norwegian government has about 20 million seeds that they've collected of food crops from all over the world. And they put them in this area, in an area that they thought wouldn't be damaged by storms or anything else. They're buried in a coal mine in the permafrost north of Norway, 800 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Think of that, 800 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Around Valentine's Day last spring, it was when we were getting one of those big snowstorms. It was raining, and the permafrost was melting, and the seed vault was melting and flooding. Now, no seeds were damaged. I don't know if you can see it, but they've got all those plastic boxes on the lower left-hand picture. The seeds are all in those plastic boxes, so they were all okay. But the place was flooding. So this summer, Norway is spending $13 million to install refrigeration in the ground 800 miles north of the Arctic Circle to keep the seed vault from melting. Those are some other views. The Alaskan pipeline is in the top right. Hopefully they got that fixed. An apartment complex in northern Siberia. You can see how the corner of the building just fell away. That was built on a good solid foundation, but the permafrost melted under one corner of the building and it could only hold so long, and the foundation collapsed and the building collapsed. That's a railroad in Canada. Those are some houses in Canada. The U.S. Southwest. This is from a couple weeks ago. The consensus has long been we can't exceed 400 parts per million CO2. In 2000, it was 380 parts per million. September 2016, 16 years later, it exceeded 400. Today, it's 412. We've gone up 12 parts per million in the last 2 years. Global warming is inexorable. Many scientists are concerned we might pass the point of no return when the damage we have caused is uncontrollable and irreversible. Nobody knows where that point is. The Arctic winter of 1718 was 35 degrees. It averaged 35 degrees above normal in the Arctic. The Gulf of Mexico never cooled below 73. Now, there are some reasons to be optimistic. I'm giving you the bad stuff. We've pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, but there's a lot of cities that are doing things, and that's what the small print is. Cities, the state of California, after 2020, all new buildings built in California have to have solar cells on their roof to generate electricity. Apple and Target are now 100% renewable energy in all of their warehouses and factories and offices where they're generating things. There are some others that aren't there yet, but they're getting close. I'm going to skip this one. Natural gas generating plants are rapidly replacing coal. Solar cells and wind turbines are now more cost effective. They're about 3 cents per kilowatt hour to generate electricity with them. Natural gas, it's about 16 cents. Coal, it's 26 cents per kilowatt hour. The economies are there. 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour versus 26. Which would you rather be paying? Let's just skip to the bottom one. On Gretchen's birthday, they announced, Consumers Energy announced that they're getting rid of all their coal-fired plants by 2030. I wish it was sooner, but I'll take anything. These cities, the last time I gave this talk, there were 4, now there's 7. Around the world, there are over 100 cities that are 100% powered by renewable energy. I just picked some of the big ones I thought you'd recognize. Auckland, New Zealand, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Reykjavik, Palmeiras, Stockholm, Montreal, Oslo, Nairobi, over 100 cities. It can be done. LG Electronics just opened a big facility in Alabama. France and Germany both installed a gigawatt, each one of them, a gigawatt of solar power last year. Now, to give you some perspective on that, the Palisades nuclear power plant, that generates 0.7 gigawatt. So they're installing more than what Palisades is. And they expect it to increase even more this year. Recognize any of those folks? Look at the one with the bright colored shirt. Anybody recognize him? That's Levi. 10-year-old UU in Florida. There's a picture in the summer UU world. See him in the upper right? That's him. Levi, that's what I showed you as a representative photo of 21 children who've sued the U.S. government for not preventing climate change. The basis of their suit is that they have a constitutional right to a healthy atmosphere and a stable climate. It's been attacked over and over again, and every time the judge has said, move forward. The trial starts October 29th this fall. They've also filed suit in 9 different state courts. Attorney generals of New York, Massachusetts, and U.S. Virgin Islands have filed suit against Exxon. They're investigating to see if the company lied to the public about climate change. Some of you saw the video I had last time, the Shell Oil video from 1990, where they said, we got to do something about it, and then they didn't. They're also investigating to see if Exxon has misled its investors about how such risks might harm the investors in their investment in stocks in their company. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Rhode Island. Remember I showed you Rhode Island? Boy, they're low there. So he has a vested interest in this. He's proposing a carbon tax of $49 a ton. But look at the second bulletin. It costs $400 per ton to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we're going to have to start removing carbon dioxide. So the economics aren't there yet. Multitude of additional bills are being introduced at federal, state, and city levels. Cities are also banning future burning of fossil fuels. So there's a lot of changes coming, not from the federal government, but from state governments and lawsuits. Trent Lott and John Breaux, I don't know how you pronounce his name. They're 2 Republicans who've been fighting global warming forever. They've been fighting against EPA emissions and all kinds of things. Well, Trent Lott this spring said the tide is turning on the realization that something needs to be done in this area, which I just about fell over when I read that. But here's what he's proposing. Carbon tax of $40 a ton. They're going to collect it, and then they're going to give it to the people who they collected it from. So if I charge you $10 a pack of cigarettes to discourage you from burning cigarettes, then I give you $10 back. Does that make sense? The real thing, though, is the third one down. The legislation includes fine print that would hold the oil and coal companies harmless from climate change. The American Petroleum Institute is starting to write some defensive articles because they're seeing lawsuits and climate policies building in different areas. What can we do? This slide is similar to what I've showed you before. We got to get involved. Several of the lawsuits that have been in courts have been dismissed, and they've said it's a policy issue that governments must solve. So we got to look at people, we've got to look at politicians that are willing to do something and elect them. Everybody gotten through that one? The Children's Trust, that's the group that Levi goes with, those 21 kids. Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, there's a whole list of advocacy groups that you can find online. We need to get moving now. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next fall. The midterms are coming, and the United States, frankly, we've lost our leadership role in solar energy. China is taking it over. Another tariff coming. Actually, they've already put a tariff on Chinese solar cells. Vote like your life depends on it. We don't have any place to go if we don't do something. Quality of life on earth is dependent upon how we treat the rest of the earth. We have a moral responsibility to look after the rest of the world, the future of which now lies in our hands. Thank you.